How's everybody doing? Good. So we're trying to bring the big sexy back to IT. That's what that song was about. But thank you all for the invite today. Going to try to kind of weave all the piece parts together from what we're doing from a CIO staff perspective. As you might have known, we reorganized recently. What it gave for us is really this focus to deliver the core foundational elements that basically enable multi-domain operations. So on the secretary side of it, Acting Secretary Donovan would say the Digital Air Force is the core enablement to multi-domain operations, right? I would argue they're actually one and the same, right? How do you use cloud? How do you use data? How do you globally connect, software-defined, zero-trust networking, software meshed? All of those concepts are on the IT side as well as the multi-domain side of it. So hopefully you'll see that there's no divide there. It's actually enabling those two integration pieces together. So that's the story that I want to give. What I also want to say is Wilson's with me today. The Vice Chief has been a phenomenal supporter to this as well, both on the digital and the MDO, as you well know. Secretary Donovan is with me in soul as well as I go through this, because this is really at the heart and soul of what he's trying to do from an Air Force perspective. So this was a pretty important picture to me. I got to go on APEX about a year ago. There's a couple very simple concepts here that I think really ring true, right? Two things. Bottom right, an iPad. The other thing, if you look kind of in the middle there, Souls 53. And that really struck me because we've come a long way, right? That core piece of fundamental IT we call an iPad is determining where those 53 souls know where to go, know how to land, and we get there safely. In this case, the C-17. Beautiful picture at Nellis Range with F-16 taken off, but that was really telling. But what's not in this picture is the extension cord that runs from the front of the aircraft to the back of the aircraft because there's no power for that iPad, right? So while in some cases we've come a long way, we've driven innovation really to the edge in the cockpit, we still have a far way to go. And so hopefully I'll map kind of where we're at, where we're trying to drive, from the iPad to the electrical cord running in the back. So this is really just a high level of our strategic plan, which isn't as important as what our core focus areas are. Number one, you'll see, deliver the network we need, not the network we funded. If you've been in the Air Force for a while, you know the RMDs and PBDs, we cut IT, we cut the network, we cut data centers in the name of consolidation and efficiency. Those days are gone. If you're going to do multi-domain operations, right, the Vice Chief, the Acting Secretary, the Chief would say, this foundational layer is core to warfighting operations. Getting my data to the edge, using AI and algorithms to actually process, the network is critical, the cloud is critical, the enterprise service is critical, and the endpoints are critical. So that's the first priority that we've got from a CIO side. Second one, cybersecurity that works. And hopefully you all get the kind of twists on words there, but this is not a compliance-based cybersecurity world we live in anymore. So hopefully give you some ideas and some insights into what we're doing from a CIO staff perspective to change that fundamental paradigm. How do we get to continuous monitoring? How do we get to risk-based discussions? How do we use pen testing and red teaming to actually determine whether we're cyber hardened versus what I would argue the RMF process, which is good at stopping a bullet because the documentation is so thick, but it does very little to thwart an adversary from 1,000 miles away or 5,000 miles away. And then, I'm sorry, the last piece of this, which we haven't talked about a lot here, but I would argue all of us have a role in this, is our airmen. It's a whole nation issue. When you talk science, technology, engineering, and math, how do we go out and recruit and develop and build and team with industry and team with academia to take that to a whole nother level? We have got to improve in that space. Probably all familiar with this drawing, and I only bring it up here really for the second part of the drawing, which is what I would call the stack model, if you want to think of it from a technology perspective. But how do we seamlessly integrate all the moving parts? I would contend we have a huge amount of innovation. Many of you are a part of that. But when we get out of sync, when cloud goes before, or when AI goes before cloud, or when cloud goes before the network, or the endpoints aren't able to consume, or the application isn't able to consume those cloud services, right? We feel a little bit better because my specific project was successful, but I didn't get to the whole of DoD when I create those solutions. So what we're trying to show here is the synchronization of various partners here, right? And I would argue that I'm actually at the lowest part of that stack, which is the network construct, the cloud constructs, the mobile devices, so that on top of that, as you can see, the chief data officer of how we interweave, how we leverage that infrastructure, deliver a new data environment, right? Absolutely critical. The DevSecOps layer that we're working between AQ and the PEOs. Lauren talked about this yesterday. Nick Shalon working through to build a couple standard constructs on top of our cloud ecosystem so that we can rapidly deploy applications, we can rapidly secure them and RMF them in a new way, not the old way of doing business. In the middle of that, right, is our weapon system and business systems, kind of the core engines, if you will, to provide the data, to provide the mechanics, whether you're talking logistics or an F-35 system. And then ultimately on top of that are the advanced analytical tools and AI tools that sit upon them. So hopefully no one would disagree with this because this is the model that we're going down. And how do we deconflict the schedules and implementations and drive the programs and dollars to make this real? And so many of you will be embedded in each one of those. A lot of the tools that are out there today are going to work in this system. At the very bottom of it, as Lauren talked about yesterday, this digital U, this focus in FY20. There's a couple approaches out there, but how do I get not just the software developer and help them develop their own skills, but how do I give that logistician at the end of the flight line the ability to learn how to code in Python or know how to use a commercial analytical suite, right? We need to arm all of our airmen with some of those technical capabilities. That's what drives scale in an enterprise as big as us, right? But hopefully this makes a lot of sense as how we're stacking things together and trying to drive programs and dollars to execute. Ultimately at the top, the Acting Secretary's Digital Air Force vision. So what are we specifically doing? So if you take the EIT piece of this, what I call enterprise IT, sometimes I'll use the word ITaaS for enterprise IT as a service, but it's basically all those enterprise IT elements. Looking across people, process, and technology, right? We have to seam through and change the way we look at the problem set. So leadership matters. Reorgs don't matter near as much as leadership. So the leadership that Lauren brings from the Chief Innovation Office, right, weaving technology and actually into implementation. Weaving our Chief Information Security Officer, Ms. Wanda Jones-Heath, on the top piece of that. She is the one putting behind the policies around fast-track ATO and software factory certification I'll talk to you later. And then we just recently announced and hired someone from industry as our Chief Experience Officer. We have not focused enough on our airmen. We give them some very archaic tools and we say, go to training for 3 months and maybe you'll be able to use it. It is not the proverbial iPad app friendly. So that person, Mr. Colt Whittle, is new on the staff. He's actually up at Hanscom right now. He'll go to San Antonio. He'll hit Wright Pat. He's on a whirlwind tour to try to nug through all the issues that are out there on the enterprise and start providing recommendations that weave within the tech stack we're trying to deliver. This is how I decompose it. So if you look at, and I'll show you a little bit more detail at the end, network as a service under the Connect portfolio. These are risk reductions that we're doing. It's also how we're delivering a 4G, 5G infrastructure. So we let those contracts last year through with our A4, which is how do you bring software-defined zero trust networking integrated with 4G, 5G, and in the future, hopefully near future, the LEO, GEO, like ComSat type things into that architecture. Next layer up, really around the compute side of it. So a lot of work. We've got 29 major applications in 2 major cloud instances. And then at the e-services level, we're, I believe, the world's largest O365 implementation of 700,000 airmen. And then ultimately bringing all devices, if you will. We have a huge implementation with electronic flight bags and e-tools down to a tablet computing device and expanding those through some additional kind of zero trust, thin clients and zero client type architectures. So really playing through that end user service. So 3 of these I'll show you a little bit later, part of our risk reductions when you hear the ITaaS program. which are how we're getting at. Those are all executed programs, and we're in operations, and I expect early October when you'll start seeing impacts in the field to some major installations. In the bottom of it, we also have to recruit and train differently. As I alluded to on the training with Digital U, giving tools in the hands of airmen is the world we live in. My son, I give the argument all the time, my son learned how to build a computer, not just build it, but spec it, understand all the interoperability issues, frequency, frame rates, all off YouTube videos. That's how he learned it. And when I said that was a comp sci class that I took in college, he said, well, I don't even like computers. I was like, it really made me think. I was like, that's the way he learns. He can jump on and we can digitally train him without him even knowing it on his own accord, right? That's the self-learning, self-awareness piece that we really want to empower. But we've got to do that from a next generation classroom, virtual classroom environment. So you'll hear more about that from a Digital U perspective. And then we've also changed our recruiting focus areas. Our OPM data standards for classification of civilian positions is from 1976. It's just not even, it's honestly not even funny from a whole nation perspective. But it doesn't mean that we can't recruit and go after talent in new ways, and that's what we're doing. So going after data scientists, going after next generation software coders, we are fundamentally retooling our recruiting processes, and it's showing its great promise. So that's the whole stack. So part of cybersecurity that works is a fundamental rethinking. And the good thing is, I think for the most part, people agree with me. This left side of the equation of building bigger walls reduces the resiliency of our network. How do you leverage software-defined networking in a huge firewall environment? And so these threats get worse and worse, and so we build bigger and bigger and thicker and thicker and bigger and bigger and thicker firewalls. It's more complex. And honestly, when you think MDO and data sharing, that's not the world that's gonna survive, right? So the whole idea of, you could argue it's cloud, it's virtualization, it's containerization, building smaller walls, not necessarily lesser capable walls, fully leveraging encryption techniques, fully leveraging application zero trust networking approaches and application development approaches. That's where we're fundamentally at with zero trust networking. Making this shift, just as industry has been doing. If you track folks like Google with Beyond Trust, I mean, these shifts of, we can no longer trust the network. We shouldn't be trusting the network, but we can still process past data, analyze data on an untrusted network. And I'm not saying that Doden is untrusted. What I'm trying to say is, in the New World Order where you're connecting from anywhere, you're getting to cloud assets from anywhere, you're gonna traverse untrusted capabilities at some point. And so how do you layer security and containerization and virtualization on top of that so you don't have to put so much trust at the underlying layer? It's the proverbial walled garden versus, I would call it, hiding in the noise, highly encrypted and hiding in the noise. So we are laying this into our network as a service. It's probably the most transformational thing we're doing, but it's also going to require all of us to think differently about how we field applications and how we do cross-domain and how we do all of that multi-level sharing of information, even on the same classification level. Also part of what we think about security, you have the conventional RMF process. Still out there, still assign ATOs this way. But what you should be really focused on is the policy we signed out a couple months ago called the Fast Track ATO. So in our cloud environment, we have repeatable, hardened containers, right? This isn't new, hopefully, to this audience. So why can't I accredit that suite and put it through a rigorous process by which a user knows how to get in, they can come in and they operate securely? There's actually dialogue at the federal level with the federal CISOs. Would you not rather somebody, even if you don't do the RMF process, build in this environment with enterprise security, identity management, all baked in, hardened, pen tested, or continue to use legacy applications going through the RMF process? I would argue the former is much better than the latter. Even if I didn't even go through RMF, I'm in a known good state in my cloud infrastructure, and honestly, we detect more out of those things than we do out of our traditional. And so leveraging Fast Track ATO is good for you as a developer, but I would also, from a time perspective, but I would also argue it actually will provide you better security, because it's actually getting at the pieces that you need to harden and the things that you can truly inherit from the enterprise and it delivers a lower cost of ownership from an application. The last thing, and Lauren talked about this a little bit yesterday, is a software factory certification. How do you do DevSecOps in an RMF process? It's fundamentally counter, right? This 12 to 18 month process on a good day doesn't match in that agile environment. And so if you ever heard me speak, I call it the USDA meat inspection process. Every piece of meat can kill you, but we don't inspect every piece of meat. We'd all be vegetarians because we wouldn't get meat out to the market. So what this does is go in and say, you're in a known good environment, you've taken our cloud instance, you've rinsed and repeat with our DevSecOps platform, and then you've got pen testing and validation that goes on top of that makes sure you stay compliant. Vis-a-vis, I went to the grocery store, we validated they're still inspecting meat like they were supposed to, or the factory, but I'm not going to inspect every piece of meat, which is what we do in applications in RMF. And so, in essence, like a Kessel run, who's kind of the forward edge of this thing, right? How do you certify Kessel run so there's a repeatable security process? It's the proverbial thing we've talked about for years about baking in security into the process, right? And so this is what we're working on right now. I'm not quite sure how much time we need more. Probably I'm thinking about 2 more months to solidify the policy. But again, it takes you accepting these new ways of business, because honestly, even the fast track, we have not had a lot of adoption. There's a lot of pent-up demand, in my opinion, but we haven't gotten to full adoption yet. So this is a little bit more detail, kind of going back to that stack. So if you want to think the lines of effort, and the bottom right, I talked a little bit about network as a service. So the dark, the bolded areas in here are what we call our risk reduction. So it's our enterprise IT as a service efforts. You can see the vendors that have been awarded. Those are public. Network as a service, both AT&T and Microsoft, about how do we leverage software-defined networking, cloud, cross-connects, software, agile, all those cool words, the big sexy for IT. How do you actually implement them? And what policies and procedures and defensive operation types of things do we have to modify in that? The ones below that is accelerating our SIPRNet modernization plan. I won't go into detail on that here. And then the last one is that cellular expansion. So awarded a contract last year for about 10 bases. We're looking to move that to 15 to 30 bases, which is mainly vendor access to our Air Force installations for you to put up your towers and extend the cellular capabilities, right? Again, part of that zero trust piece. Next piece up of that, the most recent was our award of the Edge contract. So this was, in essence, we're leveraging enterprise cloud with Amazon and Microsoft right now, Oracle, and some other vendors. So how do you get that to the forward edge in time of emergency and time of disconnect? And so that's what that Edge contract is how do you provide compute and store, analytical capability, tool capability in case you're disconnected, whether that's for safety of flight or the like. Mobile is a big put. I talked about Office 365 there. Still rolling out capabilities, but basically the Air Force minus Pentagon is in Office 365 right now. Don't get me started on that one. We got some work to do there. But the next one that I think has the most promise, again, how do we digitize our airmen, is the BYOAD, bring your own approved device. So it'll be a smaller section, but of the user population, because it has to be an approved device for us to harden it. But how do I extend DoD data and Air Force data to you at the forward edge? Some work on special programs, a lot of work that Aline Vadrine is working on with treating data as a strategic asset. So these are fundamentally tied, right? Without a cloud construct to bring those together, they're just data lakes, probably the 10,000 lakes in New York analogy if we don't bring that together. And I talked to DevSecOps and the work that we're doing right now, a lot of work on AI. How do we bring things from AFRL? You probably saw the MIT Accelerator, which is starting to chart where are no kidding examples of how we can drive AI inside the Air Force. So with that, I got my 1 minute, so I'm pretty much right on track here. Wilson was good to me. But again, I couldn't ask for any more support from the glass doors. I think programmatically, if you've been in this business, we have been a cost center. We have paid bills in the enterprise. This year, I firmly believe, certainly with the vice chief and the secretary, the acting secretary and the chief, we're going to overcome these. A lot of these are awarded, so this is not a plan to resource. These are executed contracts, the additional resourcing gets into scale so that we can touch every airman with the right mobile device, with the right cloud ecosystem, with the right security framework and DevSecOps platforms and tools that they need to do their job. This is ultimately all about MDO. So when I joke about bringing the sexy back in IT, it truly is. That's where IT makes its money, is when it delivers against the multi-domain operations side of it. So whether you're on either side of the fence, we need you on that wall. We need your support. Really appreciate AFWERX and DefenseWorks here. This is a phenomenal conference to bring some both the smaller innovative with the bigger innovative together in a multi-community. So again, hats off to everybody. I will be around if you got any questions, but thanks for all you do. Have a great rest of the Air Force Day.